Good afternoon. Yeah, woo! Yeah, it's that, dip after lunch. We're ready for it, right? Woo! 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 Oh yeah, back there, I like that. All right. I'm going to say good afternoon again, and I'm going to make you do like Matt did, do it again, right? Good afternoon. Oh, you guys are good. You know why? Because you look beautiful. It's incredible to be standing up here in front of all of you. That's so neat. It's a great morning. It looks like another great afternoon. I'm Roger Sherman. I'm the director of the Idaho Children's Trust Fund, which is the state affiliate of Prevent Child Abuse America, and we work on prevention of child abuse and neglect in the state, and work with the groups doing some fantastic work. And I have been, over the last while, very excited about the way in which the work around domestic violence, the work around child abuse and neglect are really becoming, obviously they've always been interconnected, but I think there's a lot more clarity among the groups and people who are working on this, that the work of family violence is the work of family violence, and it goes across all of those different domains, no matter who's deciding how we pay for it, which sometimes is a barrier. So I'm very excited to be introducing Jackie Payne, who is the director of the Move to End Violence. Jackie's worked with numerous organizations to promote gender equality, to prevent domestic abuse. And I'm very excited about that too, just the idea that what we're doing anymore is thinking about how we prevent, not just how we deal with the aftermath. That's also very exciting. So Jackie is going to has worked with organizations to address the feminization of poverty, to improve women's health. She's been active in the Legal Assistance Fund in Chicago, the Now Legal Education and Defense Fund, Planned Parenthood Federation of America, and the Novo Foundation. Jackie served as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University teaching gender equality and the law. Jackie also chaired the National Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence and helped lead the successful campaign to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. So let's welcome Jackie to the podium.
All right, let's get this energy up. Are we ready? They were teasing me in the lunch saying that I've got the short straw because it's after lunch, and I'm not worried. We've got it, right? Right? All right, let's see how we do. First of all, you know a little about me, but I don't have as much information about you, and I think it's important to know who you're talking to. So let me see. Who are the lawyers in the room? Yeah, be proud. It's okay. The social workers. That's what I like. Therapists, other direct service providers, educators, law enforcement, other government folks. Anyone else left? Nurses, nice. Everyone feel like they're in the right room still? Okay, good. Excellent. Well, as you heard, I'm the director of Move to End Violence, and I am so delighted to be here with you all today to talk about what we think it's going to take to end violence against girls and women in the United States. Let's see what's happening. Okay, here we go. First, I'm going to start this story by giving you a little history of Move to End Violence, and I want to just do a generational check. Does everyone know what a fax machine is? My 20-somethings see me later. So 8 years ago, Warren Buffett faxed each of his children a letter, and that fax essentially said, I'm giving you $1 billion, use it for philanthropy, and I encourage you to follow my investment strategy. And his investment strategy was to find the most untapped resource, to invest in it deeply, over the long haul. And so each of his children and their foundations followed that advice. And Jennifer and Peter Buffett, who co-founded the Novo Foundation, really thought long and hard about what did they think was the most untapped resource in the world. And they landed on girls and women. So, I know, right? Woo! After lunch crowd. That's what I like, people. Okay. And so they've been doing that work for the last several years. About 5 years ago, they reached out to me and asked if I could help them to try to address one of the biggest barriers to girls and women reaching their full potential. And as we all know, in the United States, one of the biggest barriers is the violence that's perpetrated against us. When I started, I'm a consultant to the Nova Foundation, and when I started, the task was, help us figure out how we can end violence against girls and women in the US. That is not a small job. So I began, as one should, by speaking to the experts in the field, really going to the folks who had the experience and could tell me what did they think were the strengths of the field, what did they think was most needed. And so I spent about 6 months talking to over 200 advocates in the field. And the strengths I heard about won't surprise you. I mean, mostly folks talked about the incredible passion and commitment among advocates, the deep expertise we have in the various manifestations of violence. As a result of VAWA, the incredible infrastructure we have across the country, so the direct service provision in every state in the country, as well as the state coalitions and the county coalitions. So really a powerful force. And we have made progress. There's been a significant shift in public opinion in the last 40 years. In this poll that we did 2 years ago, we saw 91% of voters agree that living a life free of violence is a basic right for everyone, and that it goes against our values when girls and women are beaten and raped. And believe it or not, right, that's a huge sign of success. That's huge progress that 91% of people will say that to us. If you're a football fan, have been watching sort of the media recently, you know that there's been quite a bit going on with domestic violence in the NFL. And a poll taken a couple of weeks ago showed us that even a majority of football fans say that they believe that the violence that's been perpetrated by NFL players is wrong, and that the NFL needs to do more to stop it. So across sort of populations, we're seeing a shift in what people are willing to tolerate. So that is huge progress. And yet, as we all know, the rates of violence in the US are still staggering. So with all of that strength and all of that power and all of that hard work, we're still seeing these kinds of rates. 40% of teenage girls saying that they know someone that's been hit or beaten by a boyfriend. At least 1 in 3 girls is sexually abused by the time she's 18. And every 2 minutes, someone is sexually assaulted in the US. So those are staggering rates of violence, and we have got to shift how we're behaving if we hope to see a different kind of outcome, right? Right now, our field reminds me of the parable of the river, where we are almost all of our resources downriver. We are so busy pulling everyone out of that river. We see girls and women coming down at alarming rates, and they are drowning. And we are standing at the base, and we are working hard to pull them out. Each of us pulling out the folks who we represent, who are our constituents. And it's it's overwhelming, right? The demand. When we talk to those stakeholders in those interviews, people talked about the fact that we can never meet the demand, that there's a never-ending shortage of a need that we're trying to fill, and it's exhausting. We're in the river ourselves, right? We're neck deep in it trying to pull people out. And what we know is if we don't send some of our resources upriver to figure out what is causing women and girls to fall in the first place and work on solving that problem, we're just gonna be down at the base forever. Now everyone wishes they went after lunch. Okay. So, and I don't want to suggest that nobody is looking upriver. There certainly are folks who are doing it. It's just a small percentage of our relative resources that are going there. So we need more people to be going upriver, and we need everybody who's engaged to be understanding the horizon, to understand that aspect of the problem and see themselves as a part of it no matter what their role is. So at MEV, we're trying to build a powerful movement that is focused on the root causes of the problem and that has us as a movement working together to create the bold social change we need. To build that movement, I think we need 3 things. One is to align around a shared vision of the world that we want. 2 is to be super clear about what real solutions look like to the problem. And 3 is to understand that we all have a role in this, and that working together, we can be powerful enough to create the change we need to create. So the first piece is about aligning around a shared vision. We need to talk about what we are for. We need to have a vision of the kind of compassionate community we want to create and that we want to live in. We don't just want to be ensuring that every survivor gets the services that she deserves. Of course, every survivor deserves quality services, but that can't be the big vision that we're shooting for. And in fact, it can't even be ending violence against girls and women. It has to be bigger than that. It has to be what we're for. What is the world you want to live in? You need to inspire in ourselves and the people who come with us a sense of hope, a sense of digging deeper for something that's aspirational. And when we do that, we have a broad horizon that we can all see ourselves in and that we want to shoot for. And so that, to me, that's something like a world in which all people have the ability to thrive and can fulfill their real potential. When we talk about something like that, we're talking about seeing all of ourselves in there, and we're seeing how our issues are interconnected, right? Because if that's the vision, then ending violence against girls and women isn't enough. It's not enough not to be a survivor if you're also poor, right? If your kids are hungry, if you're lacking good education, you're not going to be thriving and reaching your full potential in that world. So ending violence against girls and women is a part of the solution, but it's not the whole solution. And when we understand that, we see that we're actually part of a much bigger social justice movement. And that creates the opportunity for us to join forces with others and to build the power of a movement that can create the kind of change we need to create. Now, some folks may have some resistance to that and feel like, are you nuts? Like, it's the idea of ending violence against girls and women is hard enough. You not only want me to take on that, you want me to take on this bigger thing when we just talked about how exhausted we are. And I can totally relate to that, and actually it came up a lot in the interviews that we did with folks, this feeling of the incredible burnout in the field because of how we're currently operating. But here's the paradox. If we focus all of our energies on ending domestic violence or ending sexual violence, not only are we not going to create the kind of community we want, where we can all thrive, but we're not even going to end domestic violence or sexual violence. Let me repeat that part. If we focus all of our energies on ending domestic violence or sexual violence or child sexual abuse, we will not end it. Why would that be? It's a lot related to what we heard this morning. Nobody comes to us only as a survivor of violence, right? Folks come to us in the full complexity of their lives. And when we focus narrowly on an isolated problem that we're the expert in, we tend to create solutions that won't work. Think about an immigrant woman who you might serve. She doesn't come to you as an immigrant on Monday and as a mother on Tuesday and as a farm worker on Wednesday, right? And as a mother on Thursday. She comes to you as all of those things every day. And the solutions that we create need to take her lived experience into account. And an example of that is if you have an undocumented immigrant and you say to her, you're dealing with violence, so what the solution for you is to call the police, and we'll get better about how the police responds, and we'll make sure they come to your house. If you're that undocumented immigrant woman, you're terrified that calling the police is going to trigger immigration enforcement. And if it triggers immigration enforcement, you might get deported. And if you get deported, you may be separated from your children. How many of you are parents? Is a solution that separates you from your children a solution? Sorry, thinking about my babies. It's not, right? And so we end up creating false solutions. And either women won't take advantage of those solutions, or if they do, they end up with the unintended consequences, the things that we didn't see would happen because we were just focused on ending the violence, right? So we need to, as social service providers, as social justice advocates, we are all committed to ensuring that every last person in our communities gets the help they need, right? I believe that. We wouldn't be here at this conference if we didn't want that. So we have to do a better job of figuring out what the real solutions are. And history shows us that unless we're super intentional about that and we have a clear practice for doing that, we are not going to craft the solutions that work for the most marginalized. And I can say that to you as someone who's working on social change for 20 years and who has done this herself. Tried and failed. It is hard to do. And the reason for that is it's kind of human nature. We work from our own experience and from our own knowledge base, right? So it's really those of us who are in the room who define the problem. And I can't say this clearly enough. How you understand the problem completely informs what you can imagine the solutions to be, right? So if it's us in the room defining the problem and the solutions, we don't know everything. We know our experience and we know what we've worked really hard to know, but that's a limited view. And the reality of being someone who is dealing with multiple oppressions means that they're not going to be in the room. The very fact that they're suffering these multiple oppressions makes it hard for them to be in the room. And so we should and can try harder to get those folks in the room, but we also, all of us, need to be responsible for improving our own practice so we can do a better job. So how can we do that? First, let me suggest that instead of starting from the place of the particular problem that we have expertise in and trying to create the solutions that will address that problem, then we need to look at the people who we're trying to serve and the whole complexity of their lives. Gandhi would have called this person the last man. Martin Luther King would have called him the least among us. We call her the last girl. We intentionally need to start with her so that we can make sure that her experience is visible, right? And so that we can do a better job of creating solutions that will work for her. And we know that when we put the most marginalized at the center, the first thing we can do is take a look at what are the different forms of her identity and how does oppression work for her. And we need to recognize that those oppressions are compounding, right? It's not that you're a piece of yourself on every day of the week. You're all of those things all the time. So when the solutions that we're creating for you don't take into account that you're an immigrant, you're poor, and you're a mother, that's a problem. We need to understand the complexity of how those multiple intersections really interlock to block people's access to justice. And I think that the best way to really understand that, it's one thing to kind of start with this and think about what are the different pieces of folks' identity and how does that work as multiple forms of oppression. And here are just a few to think about. But for me, the next step is to really try to understand the person in the context of her lived experience, her lived reality. My first job out of law school was as a legal aid lawyer on the west side of Chicago. And my clients were all extremely low income, all African American on the west side, almost all women and their children. Nearly all had suffered some form of domestic or sexual violence in their lives. There was a neighborhood with terrible schools. We had low-paying jobs in the area and very limited public transportation to the jobs that were elsewhere. And so even if folks could get them, they were hard to get to. We had no quality childcare, and certainly no affordable childcare, limited access to healthy food. The healthy food in our neighborhood was like criminally priced. There were unsafe housing conditions, no banks, the payday loans and check cashing. And then there was a really complicated relationship with the police, who it felt like were all too willing to arrest first and ask questions later, and then the complications that come from that. And so I want to ask you to think about a client of mine who was lucky enough to get a decent paying job in a neighborhood outside the West Side. And she put all her savings down into getting a car so that she could drive back and forth to this car. And of course it was a gas guzzler and a lemon. But so she drove that car back and forth, and she had 2 little kids, and she was struggling to pay her bills between the rent and the childcare and the gas and trying to get those kids healthy food. She was definitely living paycheck to paycheck, and she was bringing that paycheck to the check cashing station, who was taking a bite out of it for the privilege of giving her money while she was at it. But there's no banks in the neighborhood, so that is what she and her neighbors did. Her son had chronic asthma, and that was not helped by the moldy 1-bedroom apartment that they had. And it was a basement apartment, and they had flooded, and it was, I don't think that was helping his asthma. But that's really all she could afford. She felt trapped there. And one night, he had a terrible asthma attack, and she rushed with her other child and him to the clinic. And in her panic, she parked the car illegally. And when she parked the car illegally, she got a ticket. And before she could come out of the clinic, the car was towed. And when the car was towed, it was brought to the impound center. And she could not get the car out of impound because it cost several $100s. And when she could not get the car out of the impound, she couldn't drive to work. And when she couldn't drive to work, she was fired. And when she was fired, she was evicted. And when she was evicted, she became homeless. And when she became homeless, she was terrified for her children. And so then they started that game of, hopping from friend's house to friend's house, staying on people's couches, her and her 2 kids sleeping together on the floor. The kids started to miss school as a result of that. And so ultimately, she ended up living with an ex-boyfriend who had been violent previously to her, but not to the children. And that lasted for a while until he was violent with the children. And when he was violent with the children, CPS came. And when CPS came, they looked at her and asked what kind of mother she was, right? They asked about her ability to protect her children. And if you're African American in this country and on the west side of Chicago, when CPS comes and looks at your mothering, you're living in the context of a country that has devalued African American motherhood since slavery. And it is a terrifying moment in your life. And we, as social service providers and social justice advocates, as people living in the US, are trained to look at the individual problem. In fact, the welfare law in our country, do you know what it's called? Personal Responsibility Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. The law that is designed to deal with poverty in our country is the Personal Responsibility Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. Personal responsibility is designed to tell us that it is your fault that you're poor. The work opportunity is designed to tell us that the solution is for you to get a job. It's all about the individual. But as social service providers and as social justice advocates, we have got to retrain ourselves to figure out how we can see the systems and the institutions that are in play that are keeping people down. So what was happening in that story that was keeping my client in poverty on the west side of Chicago? Did you see the lack of living wage jobs nearby, the lack of transportation, the lack of affordable quality childcare and healthcare, the lack of safe, affordable housing, the lack of banking institutions, right? It goes on and on. The list of institutions that are at play that help to create those situations. Only when we can start to really see those can we start to see which systems and institutions we could shift that would create the kind of lasting social change we need to create. Then we're talking about real solutions. And this is only my second trip to Boise, and I'm getting the feeling it's not the same as the west side of Chicago. So I don't know who your last girl is. I trust that you know who she is. And I know that it takes some intentional work to keep her at the center of your analysis, to look at what are the oppressions that are influencing her. Is it that she's a refugee? Is she a migrant farm worker? Is she living in a rural area without transportation? Like, what is her experience, and what are the systems and institutions that inform that? Once we have her at the center of our analysis, and we really develop a practice of holding her there, then we can look at the root causes of the problem. Remember the river? Now we can go upriver. Now we can think about what is causing her to fall into that river, girl after girl, woman after woman. And when we can do that, then we can look at the systems that will get at the root causes. Oh, this is just a picture to show you my experience of my client's life. That's what it feels like for her on the west side of Chicago. So this is literally my hand. We couldn't find a visual we liked yesterday, so we're like, all right, come on. But I wanted to kind of talk about, currently what we have is we're kind of like this. We are isolated and spread out. We are working on the different pieces of violence against girls and women. So domestic violence, sexual violence, trafficking, child sexual abuse, right? We're here and we're spread out from each other. And when we're doing this, we're also working really at the fingertips. So if you think of this as the manifestations of violence, the symptoms of the problem, that's where we spend almost all of our time. And the reality is that if you went like this, we are all connected to the same root causes. The same things are at the root of all the manifestations of violence. So if we weren't separated up here and we were here, right? Then we become powerful. Then we start to look at what is really holding us all hostage to this, and what could we do to root that out? I'm thinking a little bit with folks about what are the root causes of gender-based violence in America. And we have to be having that conversation, and our own lived experience, our wisdom informs that. We know what it is. I mean, one of the things that comes up clearly for me are the concepts of masculinity that we have in this country that devalue and degrade women, right? That teach boys and men about what manhood is, and that fosters a sense of violence against girls and women. And we need to ask ourselves, if that's an example of a root cause, what are the systems and institutions that are in place that are helping us to construct our ideas of masculinity and to enforce them on us, right? Can anyone just shout out, wait, I need my picture. Thank you. Can you see some of the systems or institutions that are enforcing notions of masculinity here? What do you see? Sport. What? Religion? Sports, law enforcement? Military? Homeland security, media? Okay, so we can see the different systems that are in place, and you can imagine how are they currently being used to enforce these ideas, to teach and really enforce these ideas of what masculinity is and can be in America. And once we can see that, then we can evaluate those systems and look for what are the opportunities, what are really the game changers. If we went after this, if we shifted this lever, what could create the kind of really game-changing, long-term social change that we need to see? I'm wondering if anything is popping to mind in terms of a recent example that came up in the media that creates an opportunity for us. Sports, what's the sports opportunity? A game-changing opportunity? Okay, I'll tell you. So, NFL, thank you. So, as we talked about earlier, when this Ray Rice incident happened, and particularly when the video got out, right, the polling showed that the majority of NFL fans thought that it was wrong and that we should take different action. And so that created a really important opportunity to put pressure on the institution of the NFL. And the NFL offers this great opportunity because of the magnificent social and cultural power that athletes have as role models here, right? Whether you like it or don't like it, it is true that boys and men are really have their ideas of masculinity informed by athletes. So it's an incredibly powerful social force. And the NFL is literally the largest, most powerful brand in the United States of America. So we have a huge root cause of a problem and an incredible opportunity to shift one of the most powerful systems. And I need to shout out right now the leadership of Kelly Miller in taking on this game-changing opportunity and seeing it for what it was. I don't know how much you know about what's been going on with this campaign, but if it wasn't for Kelly's leadership, this campaign would not be happening. I can tell you that because I get the emails at 11 o'clock at night on Sunday, which we should talk about in the self-care portion of this discussion. But really, that Kelly saw the opportunity and acted, and she brought folks along with her. And so in that moment, we really pursued this notion of what would social change look like? What does the long-term solution look like? It's not just media, although media has a component. It could look like really engaging communities and talking with boys and men throughout the sports pipeline, using the NFL coaches, teams as a social, like a role model to shift those notions of masculinity. So it's a great example of a social change opportunity. And if we keep the last girl at the center of our analysis, then we need to grapple with some sticky questions here, and Kelly's leadership has allowed us to do that. So putting her at the center, you're going to want to pay attention to the fact that African American girls and women are disproportionately survivors of violence against girls and women, right? They're disproportionately impacted. So if we pursue this opportunity, what happens? And you always want to ask yourself 3 questions whenever you're thinking about doing any kind of policy or social change. Who is going to benefit from this? who is not going to benefit from this, and what might be the unintended consequences. Having that simple practice will vastly improve our ability to see what we can't see at first, right? So asking ourselves those 3 questions. The other thing we were thinking about with the NFL is that African American players make up a majority of the NFL. So if we focus on the NFL and not on baseball or not on hockey, what are the unintended consequences of that? So first let me back up to say, in terms of what would it look like to make this actually work for African American girls and women, to look at the last girl in that context, we need to make sure we have African American leadership at the table helping to inform the solutions. We need to make sure that it's culturally competent and it's really gonna work for them. That we're not just saying, oh, remember this solution we created for these people? It'll work, right? We know it won't work. It's different. So we got to pay attention to that and be intentional. The second thing is thinking about, if African American men make up the majority of football players, and we really focus on football, what are the unintended consequences of that? I'm going to show you what they were. This is Halloween. This is this past weekend. Every single person in this picture is a white person with black face. In almost all these pictures, you see a black woman being dragged around by her feet or her hair. I don't know what to say about the parents who put that child in that outfit. And I really don't know what to say about all of them. I mean, this family in the bottom right corner, that was tweeted by their son, who was really proud of how cool his parents were and how they were going to win the costume because they were the best ones. We live in a country that has been dealing with racism for a long time, right? Even though I can't believe people think that blackface is okay or that domestic violence is funny, when we lift up this issue, this is part of what happens. When this is part of what happens, how does that relate to what's happening in Ferguson, right? What about the folks who are working on the images of black men as violent in America that causes law enforcement to see them as a threat and to shoot first? They are not disconnected. That doesn't mean that this isn't the best opportunity that we have and that we shouldn't grab it. It does mean we need to think about that and be in relationship with our other social justice allies to figure out how to navigate these complexities. So that's the third part of my talk. It's like, if we have the same vision and we're starting to understand how to look at the solutions differently, how are we going to actually make them happen? What does it look like to create change? And I just really want to focus on the power of relationships. The key is that we have to remember that we all have a role to play in relationship to each other, and that if we're operating together, right, we can be powerful enough to create the change we want to see. When I was at Legal Aid, we went to you heard my story, you know how my experience with my clients, and like many of you who are direct service providers, it was essentially the same problems day after day. I might have solved it for that one client, but the next day her neighbor was there with the same problem. And after a while, gets so exhausting, as I know you know. And so for me, I ended up deciding that I wanted to go upriver and I wanted to work on the root causes. I moved to DC and I worked on, at that time in the late 90s, the Violence Against Women Act, on the welfare law, and then later on reproductive health rights and justice. But everyone shouldn't move to DC or Boise. I did have to look up what was the capital of Idaho. I apologize about that. So you don't need to move to the capital. Everyone doesn't need to go upriver. In fact, everyone cannot go upriver. We desperately need the work of direct service provision for this to work, right? Those folks need and deserve the quality services that we're providing. And so it's not in any way to discount that. We do need some folks to go upriver, and then we need everybody to understand they're part of this network and they have a relationship to each other here. So if you're doing direct services or you're somewhere along the bank, you need to be understanding what the vision is, be part of informing what the solutions are and our understanding of the problem. And that can happen directly through bringing your own expertise as service providers who have this depth of knowledge about your experience. But it can also happen indirectly by connecting your clientele, up to the social change work that's going to be taking off. When I was at Planned Parenthood, like 2003, It was before we were, Planned Parenthood at that time wasn't really a social change operation. It was a national network of healthcare providers. And there were folks all along the political spectrum. And the most common feeling was, whatever party they may have been affiliated with, the most common feeling was, I don't want to be involved in politics. I'm a healthcare provider, I'm a service provider. I don't want this, what you're selling me, I don't want to be part of. And so it was really an uphill battle to get folks to realize that our clients are operating within a political system, right? When we look at my client, she is operating in a political system where decisions are being made about the systems and the institutions that are holding her there. And I actually firmly believe that we have a moral obligation to help to connect our clients up to realize that it is not them, that they are part of this broader system, that it is operating, and that they are powerful agents of change who can help us to understand the problem, and they can be part of the solution themselves. So I could go on about that one, but I'm going to keep going. I really, really believe we have that role, and it is the best service we can do to our clients is to unlock their potential to be agents of change themselves. Let me just quickly move on to the last point, which is that it is one thing, that was all about the relationships within our field, how we're going to operate within our field, and we also need to think about how we're operating as a part of a broader social justice movement. One of the biggest barriers to looking at people in their full complexity and trying to really take on the root causes is that it's harder. It's so much harder to do the work that way. And that can be overwhelming, especially if you're already feeling burnt out. But I hope that through the talk, you're, appreciating, and I know from your own lived experience, appreciating that it is the only way to do it well. That is the only way we're actually going to shift things and be different. And so the way for this to be possible is to be in relationship with one another, to lean into each other's other knowledge base. In a minute, you're going to hear from Miriam Young, and she and I have never lived in the same city, but we have now been friends for a decade, and we have different areas of expertise, and we've relied on each other over the course of 10 years. And yes, we talk about our babies and everything else, but we also talk about what helped me to learn about immigration reform, help me to learn about LGBT, what do I need to know to do this well, and can you bring someone to do this part? And it's that kind of relationship that will allow us to both get the right solutions and to create the power we need to create the kind of change. These systems are not going to top themselves over, right? We need to become a powerful force, a powerful movement for social change. And that kind of relationship building and seeing ourselves in connection is the way to do it. I want to just leave you with the metaphor of a flock of geese. If you can imagine a V, the flock of geese flying alignment towards the sun. In this metaphor, the sun is the vision. And the geese reflect a movement that is headed in that same direction in alignment with each other. And this is actually the MEV logo. And we choose that logo because in nature, you never see geese flying all kinds of crazy directions, each going in their own way, doing their own thing. And yet, as a field and a movement, this is kind of how we feel sometimes, each doing our own good work, but in our own direction. And what we want to be is headed in the same direction, moving towards the same vision and the same horizon. And what we really want to be and where we are going to get as a movement is to be in alignment and to understand how we can operate together, what our relationship is together, no matter where our role is in the chain, how can we be in this position together? And one of the last things I'll say is that one of the things I love about geese, which, trust me, I knew nothing about geese before this, was that the head geese shifts. Do you know this, you geese people? Okay. The head geese shifts. It's not the same person in the lead all the time. And that's really important to us, both within our movement, because we need to practice self-care and not always be in the front and to shift it off. And it's really important across social justice movements, because when we do that, we can see if the issue is violence, then I am in the lead and you will come with me. And you don't have to be doing everything I'm doing, but you should sign on and you do understand we're connected and you do ask your people to join me in that. And if the issue is raising the minimum wage or expanding Medicaid, then you're in the front and I will back you up. And together we can create the kind of change we want to create. And I just want to say to you guys that I could not have been more honored to be asked to come here, to be here with you all in this room, because what's happening here doesn't happen everywhere. You're here, hundreds of people from different sectors and different social justice movements, all looking at that vision of a compassionate community, and that is the most promising chance we have of creating the change we want to see. So I really want to just applaud you for what you're doing and tell you that I am like deeply inspired by you, and I cannot wait to see you continue to fly. Thank you.